And the next thing you know, it starts. It's amazing how that happens. Here we are again, episode, what is it? 27? Episode 27, did we say?
Yeah.
Yep, more than
Episode
half a year.
27 of Keeping the Learning On. And it is just amazing. This all started with just people having conversations. And then the next thing you know, they're having conversations in other places. And then the next thing you know is probably the next thing you know. I'm not sure. In any event, welcome. Friday morning, and we have guests with us today again. Once again,
Yay.
we have Dee Burgoyne with us, who writes about compassion and has a book on that subject. And we have Kathy Veldboom back with us again. Thanks, Kathy, for joining us again.
Kathy.
Always a pleasure to have you aboard. And we're going to talk today about, what are we talking about today? We're going to talk today about what comes after A fault, B fault, and C fault. Default, that's it.
That's it.
That's it. Falling into default is the title of today's episode. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you just go back to the way you were doing it before you were supposed to have changed the way you were doing it, and you didn't change the way you were doing it. So there. And we're going to explore some ramifications of that. So let's see. So falling into default. I like the dominoes. Do you like the dominoes falling over?
I like the dominoes, but when you think about it, there's a fault and, there be a fault and hey, I see the fault and now I'm down the default.
Was this material rehearsed, Simone?
Apparently not.
Absolutely not. That's what makes it so.
I know, we're live
Reading.
and in person.
Who are these people? Well, the fabulous four originals anyway, and we have this family is growing here now, so we're gonna have to add to this slide. Patty Blackstaff up in Alberta, Canada. And I could sing a Gordon Lightfoot song about Alberta, but I won't. Greg Sanker in Oregon.
What song goes with Oregon to you right now, Roy?
What song says Oregon to me? Are we a staying or are we gone? Anyway, Simone is in the southwest of France. I have to say that. I say that stupid every week, don't I?
No, but it's like that low thing. It's like that, the British policeman that, it's France.
France. Mais oui. And I'm in South Carolina. And Kathy, where are you?
I'm in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Dee, you are in Virginia, Maryland?
I'm out near West Virginia.
West Virginia, okay.
Near West Virginia.
Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads. Anyway,
Oh dear.
sorry, couldn't resist that.
I bet you've never heard anyone ever do that before. Never. Guessing.
Ever.
Yeah.
Never, ever. Yeah.
Well, Ash, I was going to say to Kathy, I want to ask, I know you're in Minneapolis, but where's Appolis? If you're the mini version.
Oh.
Annapolis.
Wow.
That's all I can come up with on short notice.
He totally smoked you on that one. That was good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, if you've been following any of these shenanigans on Fridays, hey, I got the word shenanigans in there, Patty. See?
Woohoo.
These are good shenanigans.
These are good shenanigans. And we have moved on into season 2 since episode 21 was the first episode of season 2. I don't know what that season, I don't know what that means. And so we changed the format a little bit, and we have an interviewer of the week. And today's interviewer of the week, for our benefit, and we enjoy when this happens because then we don't have to do anything. Essentially, we're just going to let Greg talk and turn our cameras off. Is Greg Sanker. So, Greg, it's all yours.
Well, see, you throw me this difficult challenge here of falling into our defaults. And, it's interesting, Roy, that, we talked about, how many episodes we did for season 1, 20 episodes, and then we turned it into season 2. And one of the things that we did was we changed our format, right? We just keep learning and growing based on feedback, based on what seems to be working. But sometimes, left to our own devices, we may slide back to old ways of doing things. And it's in that context. And right now, there's so much change that's happening in the world. So much is changing in our lives, in our jobs, and how we interact with others, that we've been talking about what is new normal. Is there even such a thing as a new normal, or is it the same old normal? Are we going to slide back to where we've been? There's so many applications of this, but in organizations that are conscientiously trying to transform what they do, this is coming your way, Patty. Organizations try to change. One of the biggest challenges that we face in an organizational change management is, how do we keep from sliding back? We think we've made progress, we think we've adopted new ways, and then we fall back into. So how does that happen in an organization, Patty?
So I've been doing change and transformation for about 12 years as a consultant, and everybody manages by default. We all like the comfort zone of how we work. Default, if you take a look at it as a definition, the definition I use is a selection made in the absence or lack of a commitment to an alternative. So if you take a look at change and transformation, we're trying to get to an alternative. And so in order to be able to move, to be able to get forward, you have to commit to that alternative. It's like you buy a new house, right? When you buy a new house, you don't leave your stuff back. You don't expect the movers to change your mail or your address. You don't expect the movers to handle your utilities or your neighbor to pack up your garage, or, well, unless you're doing something illegal running or you're a psychopath. But overall, you tend to decide that you're going to be responsible for every little detail of the move. Well, transformation's the same way. We have to be intentional about what can be. So what we see when we slide into default are a couple of things. One, leaders are choosing not to change themselves, so they don't believe that's part of their role. They offload that, like me saying to the mover, gee, hey, I'd really, really like it if you would take care of all the little things like redirecting my mail or whatever that looks like, or contacting my credit card companies and telling them my billing address has changed. When you don't take responsibility and commit to the alternative. The other one is resourcing. So when you expect people to transform a company, but only those people, and you do so with a side of the desk kind of an effort, what you end up having are people just slide back into the default of how the company was run. It's what we've always done, so it was comfortable. We were successful before, so why wouldn't we be successful now, right? And so that's kind of an obvious way that we kind of slip into default.
So, Roy, is there ever a difference between routines and falling into default? I mean, we frequently associate a negative thing with falling into the default, but the default was created for a purpose, or it was allowed to develop because, as Patty said, it was successful. We were successful with it. So we're trying to change away from something that at least some of us perceive as, but that worked. It was valuable, or I personally invested in it. So is it ever a good thing? Is a default ever a good thing?
Oh, sure. And routines can be extremely beneficial. We tend to live by routines. We get up in the morning, we do certain things, we brush our teeth, we comb our whatever, some of it anyway. And then we do these little things every day. That's fine. And a lot of us will have a routine when we get to work. Or the order in which we open things up on our desks can be the same. None of that really has a consequence in terms of the organization as a whole. Where routines can really start to be a problem is when you start digging ruts in the road, and this is the way you do things, and the wagon stays in those ruts and it won't get out of those ruts because everybody is driving in those ruts all the time and can't get a different side of the road from which you might get a different point of view. You might be able to let somebody get past you. You might be able to do a whole bunch of other things. So routines can be fine, but you have to make sure that you aren't getting caught in a rut.
Yeah. So, Simone, I've heard you talk about resilience, and you talk about it frequently, which is challenging to me. But how are defaults and resilience kind of interrelated? How do they support each other? How do they oppose each other?
Well, I think before we can get to that question, we need to understand what is that pattern, what is the brain pattern that happens around it. So I think if I think about why do we generally default to a negative pattern, I say generally because not all people do,
Right.
but really it's an evolutionary hangover. The reason that I mean from day dot, this is like, coming out of the primordial soup
I'm
kind of
so
stuff.
sorry. I have.
So it's like our nervous system, the human nervous system is our information highway. And just to break it down really simple, especially for the tech folks, all right, our brain is our server room. Our central nervous system is like our WAN, and our LAN is our peripheral nervous system, right? So that just sort of, that connectivity of what the brain does in terms of the way it sends messages to what is it that we're going to do. And on average, this is going to freak you out, Greg, 60,000 thoughts a day on average. And of that, 95% are repetitive. No jokes about the women male thing. Don't need that. 95% of them are repetitive, but 80% of those are actually habitual. Okay, so they're things that we do all the time, but the majority of that 80% are negative. We are hardwired to think in the negative way, and that's because of the reptilian brain. The whole chomping dinosaurs thing. So in today's context, think about how we've brought that into today's context. What are today's chomping dinosaurs going on around us with work or at home, and that sort of thing?
Don't you think though that sometimes, especially in corporate life, don't you think sometimes we see something that might just be a normal happenstance and say, "Oh my gosh, it's a dinosaur! Danger, danger!" Right? And I think that's a challenge that we face. And so, how do we become less reactive and more resilient?
Okay, and that's where that resilience comes in. I think we've got to understand where we're coming from, what's our natural, I guess, brain state, and move from there. Now, research has already said resilient people really excel in problem solving and positive communication, emotional intelligence, but also regulating our emotions. And they tend to be more hopeful and optimistic, so they have higher levels of self-esteem. In fact, Patty mentioned something earlier about this when we were chatting offline. There's a real difference between ego and confidence. And I think that's something we can certainly explore in this. But in essence, we need to cultivate resilience, firstly, because we're in this volatile, ever-changing, dynamic context right now. And as such, it's very easy to default to our behaviors. Now, some of them are good, but some of them will need some adjustment. So there's something that came from a cool TV series I liked called The Company, and it was about the Cold War and the CIA, but it's called Patterns Are Like Shells of Conspiracy. So we want to understand what are those behavior triggers, not just what the negative ones and aware of them and shift those, but what are the behavior triggers that are optimal for our health and our mental and emotional health?
See, Simone, I'm just going to pause the whole episode and just say, this is why I love getting you talking about this topic, because you bring together such a wealth of, IT people, and I'm an IT people, right? From square one. We think in nuts and bolts and pliers and wires and all this analytical stuff, but you bring in factors of how the brain works and how humans feel and how we interact, because that is part of the total picture. And I love
it's still science.
It's still science, and all that soft stuff, that fluffy stuff. But when you spend time at a senior level in an organization, is it's sometimes you recognize that it's not about pliers and wires. It's not about, due dates, deadlines, and deliverables. It's about people, and people are messy, if I can say that in a recording. It's like, because they're nonlinear, they're non-predictable, because there's so many factors. So I want to shift a little bit to this and say, so Patty, you frequently get called. I know this because we've had conversations, and you have no idea where I'm going with this, because this is not pre-rehearsed, but you frequently get called as an OCM or a transformation specialist after we've already started and after we've already seen some struggle. It's like, we need to bring in some OCM. So when you land in an organization like that who needs help, what are the signs that you're looking for that are problematic and challenging, and what are the signs that we want to take forward with us? How do you help sort out what's helpful and what's not helpful?
If you look at a transformation differently, let's say your business is a train and it's running on a track, right? You're ticking along very nicely, but you're on a track, and you cannot stop and visit scenery. You can't learn about the areas you're driving through. You're on a track. You can't get off. Transformation is, we want off. We want something different. We want to be able to see some scenery. We want to be able to stop in a small town. We want the opportunity to do that. In order to do that, you have to learn how to drive the car. And a lot of organizations, when I walk in, they bought the car. They haven't considered the thought of how the car would impact the entire organization. So they bought the car. They haven't planned for the journey. They have started driving, but no one learned how to drive. And they're moving down this highway in this crazy speed that is not going to serve them if they don't have all of their luggage and all of the things in the plan, and so they'd often bring OCM in a little bit late.
Mm-hmm.
The other failure is to recognize and understand that it's an organization. It's the whole organization. If you're going to transform, you're not throwing a tool in on top. I have walked into I'm not even going to tell you the number of times I've walked in, they've called it a transformation. And really, it's just adding technology layered on top of all the stuff they've already got.
Yes.
So they don't look at their processes or their policies or their governance or their, right? So they haven't had anybody, an organizational development person, look at it. They haven't looked at how behaviors are managed in the organization. So those are the issues. They haven't properly packed and learned how to drive their car.
Simone.
So,
Yeah, there's actually, it comes from an Australian, local tourism advert for the Northern Territory. But just something, when you're saying OCM comes in late, the first thing that came into my mind was this phrase this advert uses, which is, if you never go, you'll never know. So it's never really too late. Just go.
well, you know what? You want to bring someone in, absolutely, but it's best and it's most successful if you can get in there early, because the whole idea of a transformation are two things that you want to achieve. Number one, you want to change. You want to get different results than you're getting now. And if you're not looking at different results and you're just looking at legacy technology, it's not a transformation. The second thing is, you as an organization want to do something different. So if you can take a look at organizational design and OCM prior to resourcing, prior to buying the car, prior to this is what we're thinking of doing. We're analyzing and looking at these different vendors. We're taking a look, and your OCM can act a little bit as a liaison between the company and the vendor. The company doesn't know what they don't know. They have no idea because it's new. And the vendor has something to sell. So they can tell you all about features, but they can't tell you how those features are going to work really well with your organization. So you know that you're moving forward if you are getting better results and you're doing things differently that meet your strategy.
I love that, because Patty, as you know, I was a CIO for 30 or so years. And one of the things that I found really challenging is that folks out in the business, including HR, transformation is new technology. We want to get a new system and that will change everything, right? So this is the non-IT folks speaking. And I'm the CIO. Remember me, I'm pliers and wires. And I'm saying, this isn't about technology. we've got to look at how we work and what are our business processes and how do we change that? And by the way, what is it that we're trying to achieve to know if this piece of technology actually helps us, right? So Dee, I don't know you well, but I'm calling on you because anybody here on the panel will tell you that I do that. I just randomly call on you because you have that look on your face that says, ooh, call on me, right? We still have you on mute, Dee. Oh, there you go.
Hi, I hate to admit it, but I come from the HR world. My background is in
started on that.
education
Yay! Cheers.
and HR, and I'm a people person. And some of the notes I've written down here, you mentioned the soft stuff. The soft stuff is the hard stuff.
It is the hard
It's
stuff.
the things you can't measure, and it's the things. It's funny, when I went to high school, they did all these tests, and they said I should be an accountant, and I know it's because I like things to be finished, lined up. You put the numbers on the paper, they add up, and you leave at night and they don't jump off the page. But when you're working with people, you can have everything all lined up and perfect, or as perfect as it can be. And you come back the next morning and they've all decided to go off the page somewhere else. So
It's kind of like our episodes, Dee. So you're in perfect company there.
So I've been listening, and I have been watching the COVID world, and I'm more of a change catalyst in the area of culture, changing the culture of a company. And I view IT and technology as the tools that you put in your tool belt that support what you do, that is the culture, the personality, the pulse of your company and what you're trying to do. And I see
You are singing the song of my people.
I was just going to
Oh.
say, Dee, I'm gonna have to be rude to you and just say yes, 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 yes.
You'd be surprised what dull looks I get when I talk. So I think I found the right people.
Oh, you did.
So I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about the COVID world, and I know some people are returning to work.
Mhm.
Some people continue to work throughout. Some people and are coming back all at once. Some people are coming back in dribbles, but it's an ideal opportunity for changes to be made because change is already there. And the people who are so resistant to change, especially people who have been with an organization for 25 or 30 years, like some of the nonprofits I work with, it's changing anyway. So what do we want it to look like? Otherwise, it's just going to work. It's going to create itself, or it's going to go into default because people will come back from wherever they've been and they've changed. They are not the same people that they were that walked out the door.
Yeah.
They may look the same, but they've changed.
So
This is a perfect time.
So Dee, you and I are going to set up a conference call and talk about this, because one of the things that I see happening right now is there is changes that are happening in organizations in response to work from home and work in the office, and some of them aren't good. And I'll say this just briefly before we move on, but that is, we're installing activity monitors, keystroke loggers, and other ways to manage, are you sitting in your chair right at home? And that is telegraphing very loud that nothing's changed. We don't trust you. If we don't see you, you're not working. And I think that's completely antithetical to transformation. It's
Exactly.
antithetical to...
You know what it's called, Greg? You know what I'm hearing in that description of that conversation? We need a flux capacitor.
Yeah, yes. Kathy, you've been dying to get in here.
Yeah, I have a question for Patty, being that person that's brought in from the outside. I don't know if you've encountered it. I'm guessing that you have, but what do you do when you go into an organization at the executive level if they are comfortable, they are stuck in the rut, and they don't want to change? And yet they may have been the ones that brought you in because they see something's going on in the organization. Maybe they've started to make some changes. And I also want to say to Dee, I would love to join that conversation. I question whether, you were talking about change and starting to change. We have to change now. We can't wait till we get back together. we can't wait for the people that have been comfortable for 25 years to change. So keep in touch with you there. But Patty, what have you seen and how do you approach that?
Well, I will tell you the very first thing I do when I walk into an executive office is I ask them two questions. One, I ask them, what do you believe change management is? Write it on a piece of paper. Don't share with your friends. Keep it to yourself. Just write the description of what you believe change management is, why you brought me in. Number two, what do you believe needs changing? So those are the two questions. And I give them time to do that. When all of that's gathered, I read them out. And the one thing that they discover in that session is that not one of them believes the same thing.
Yeah,
That strikes up the opportunity for us then to say, we need a session. We all need to get on the same page, because if we don't have our poop in a group here as a group, you're never going to be able to push anything out there. And what we discover through that facilitation then is their responsibility. So we talk about different areas of sponsor responsibility. One of them is I'm committed, so I've signed a check. Number two is I believe in it, so I'm going to put a steering committee together. And I'm going to actually be at the steering committee. And number three is I'm actually committed, involved, and going to be part of the transformation. It's when we can get them to understand that they have to be part of the transformation, that's when things begin to change. We talk about the difference between operations. One of the biggest hits to an executive is we're changing because we're doing it wrong, and that's a fallacy. And so we have to get to operationally, you're doing things right, but the world around you is changing. And so we have to move to transformation. And what we do in transformation is totally different than what we're doing in operations.
Yeah, you nailed it on multiple things. But first, I have to give you a bad time. Hashtag poop in a group, Patty Blackstaff, right here. I think that there's a really important question on the table, and I feel like maybe it's another episode, but the whole idea of when we've met the enemy and the enemy is us, when the senior leadership knows something needs to change, but doesn't necessarily know that they're where the bulk of the problem is. It's not that they're at fault, because those same leaders made the organization successful. However, the world has changed and they may not have adapted. And the way I tie this back, Patty, is they may be part of that, that elastic band that wants to pull back to the way we've always done it. Because for me, I'm the person speaking, there's this tendency to say, but it worked. And I was part
but
of that.
that's where their default elastic band, that default, the longer they stretch it, the harder they pull it, man, that's just going to snap them back in the face.
So this has been a lot. I love this. And I literally, I'm going to pull a call together so that we can deep dive into this, and
Cool.
anybody's welcome to join. But bring us back to earth, Roy. Do you have any real life examples of falling back into default behavior? Let's ground this conversation again back to the really practical.
One of my favorite examples.
I knew you would have an example.
Yeah, of course I do. My friend Neil was a New York State trooper, and in his early days in the New York State Police, he was working patrol on the New York State Thruway, which happens to go across a bridge called the Tappan Zee Bridge. And at one point, one morning, a large section of the Tappan Zee Bridge collapsed into the Hudson River. And Neil's unit was dispatched to help traffic control because there was no road except for one lane. And the people who were backed up behind this were trying to get around the cops and go across this small section of lane that had not yet collapsed into the river. And he stopped somebody and said, what are you doing? And he said, gotta go to work. I gotta go to work. People behave the way they behave because it's what they know. It's what they do over and over again. And they feel strongly tied to that. And of course, there's lots of reasons people want to get to work, but really think about that. They were going to drive over a small section of road with no guardrail and an opening, down 75 or 100 feet down to the Hudson River because got to go to work. That's kind of being stuck in a rut.
This is a real story, right? This is not made up. That's amazing, right? And what's amazing is I can look at that and say, that's just so stupid. That's easy. But when I'm doing that, it's not stupid. It's intelligent. It's smart. It's based on facts and data and all kinds of stuff. And you realize I'm being facetious here because it's very hard to see in ourselves. So Simone, I'm going to turn back to you after saying she brings all the human pieces together. This is brains. This is how people think. So what are some of the approaches that you use to work with default behaviors that may not be particularly beneficial? Meaning the behaviors, not the techniques.
Yeah, exactly. Well, neurons that fire together wire together is what we actually say. So yeah, this is a really funny thing. Some Speaking of those examples, and I was actually not far off when I was in Fiji. We were in the middle of a tropical cyclone, and they were trying to get us to one end to this other little tiny airport because we couldn't get to the other one. And just after, I'm not kidding, just after the minivan crossed the bridge, the whole bridge collapsed behind us. And it's like, well, that option's not going to be there anymore. So we may as well keep moving forward. I think that's part of it. It's that, I'm not a robot, but I was programmed. Now, as a soldier, I had certain behaviors and they are so practiced. And this is the practical side. They're so practiced, they become ingrained. And it's really about that autonomic response. Now, it doesn't mean those default modes of response are necessarily bad. It's just that I have learned the hard way quite a few times that sometimes those default responses aren't exactly appropriate in the corporate environment. So very not long after I had left the military and I was sitting at the desk, very focused, headphones on, and one of my pals, one of my colleagues thought it would be funny to sneak up behind me and, do that little boo thing. Bad move, because it just autonomic response, bang, turn around, whack. And I mean uppercut under the chin, back into the wall, and she slid down like a sack of potatoes. Now, that is scary because your first reaction was such because you haven't shifted your pattern yet. If you haven't shifted your autonomic behaviors, if you haven't shifted what's going on in the neurons. I mean, we've got 40 major tracks, 257 different directions going along in the brains, millions of neural connections. And the more you practice something, the more they come together. That's why we have practice makes perfect, because the stronger those circuits are going to get. Happy people actually start questioning their own thinking. So one of those approaches, when you start thinking about it, we start to question our thoughts. When we question our thoughts, we change our relationship with our thinking. And we're able to start choosing what we believe and choosing what we respond to in our lives. So we can sort of reclaim some of that habitual thinking, if you like. And during the night, the less we use a behavior, our brain starts to do what we call synaptic pruning. In other words, deleting those files out of our brain overnight. So look at those approaches. We need to understand how the human brain works. As a mixologist, I blend lots of different approaches. Never just go for one. Look at the context you're currently in. What's going on around you. They can be HR or OCM or complementary health or IT frameworks or culture and business practices. Look at how those blend together to what you're doing.
So it occurs to me that we're looking at one aspect of change. But like if we move the location of the coffee machine in an office, how many of us go to the wrong location and go, oh yeah, the coffee machine has changed?
That's like swapping their watch on the wrists.
Exactly. How many times will we go back to this is a rhetorical question. How many times do we go back to the wrong location? You'd think once. It's like the coffee's not here, but we do it again and again and again and again. So it occurs to me that there's a big difference between who moved my coffee pot with a nod to who moved my cheese And an organization that fundamentally needs to transform to stay in business, or is leaving a business and moving into a new kind of business. I mean, a line of business. So Patty, you've talked before about a continuum of change, right? So help us to put this into context, especially when we're talking about the pulling back to a default behavior. And I don't have, you're on mute, sorry.
When I was working in the school system, sorry about that,
Yep.
we did some research on what it takes in order to understand how to make people commit to habit. And they say it takes approximately around 40 iterations of an activity before it becomes a new default. So what you're trying to do is instead of falling back into an old default, you're trying to recreate new tracks or a new default. But you have to give people a reason to want to do that. And that's what we fail at doing often when we're talking about transforming. We don't give people a reason to leave those defaults, to get out of that comfort zone, to figure out a different route to work, right? So there's a continuum that moves through denial, pushback, exploration, and commitment. Before they can get to commitment, we have to address things like denial, pushback, and exploration. And I am not, there's a whole school of thought on resistance management, and that is not my school of thought. If you're managing resistance, in my brain, is what you're trying to do is you're trying to come in after the fact and fix something that's broken. If you are actually planning and putting a lot of time, resources, and money into planning the transformation based on how departments function, how people in those departments function, then you're doing something different. And you have to allow time for the change to sink in, which means early messaging, communication, anticipating needs, encouraging them. You have to listen carefully when you hear pushback, because it isn't resistance. It's give me a reason.
Yeah.
I want to be part of this company. I just need a reason, right? So you have to encourage people by addressing the concerns, not saying we need to move this. Then you need to take a look at when you start seeing people move, when you start seeing people getting toward exploration, they're testing, they're trying something new. That's when you need to open up workshop participation. That's when you need to allow feedback and deal with changing attitudes and address indecisiveness and fears, and really take the time to give them a reason to want to move forward. Once they're committed, then you need to reward that, and you need to start looking at a plan or a methodology of providing reward throughout the company where they feel like they are actually part of your purpose, where they are, by making the change, they really have done something to add value themselves, in their department, and up through to the purpose of the company. So that change continuum is about managing response, not resistance, and looking at where they're responding, but also remembering that this guy's going to be in denial, and at the same time, this guy's going to be in exploration, and this girl's going to be in pushback, and this girl's committed. So you have to train your managers on change so that they can understand how to recognize and move those people through.
You are so spot on. I joined an organization about 10 years ago, shortly after something happened. And it was an organization that was desperately in need of transformation. So I wasn't there. I don't know. But what the staff heard the CIO, the new CIO that was going to transform things, what they heard him say was, "You suck." Literally, quote unquote, "You suck." And what the rest of that organization, and I'm not naming names, because we all learned a lot. But the rest of the organization said, "We need a new IT system because that one is antiquated and it's falling apart, and it was built in the 70s, and it's an abysmal failure." So I talked to staff. That's what I do. I talk to people. And they said, it wasn't built in the 70s. The system that we had replaced a system that was built in the 70s. We went through a massive transformation in the mid 90s that is instantiated in that code. And I resent that we suck because we've been underfunded and underappreciated, and we keep this thing going and we're meeting the business objectives and our business likes us, right? So we started a transformation with, well, you all know that everything is horrible and terrible, bad, and everything that you guys have been doing for the last 20 years needs to be thrown away. It's a disaster, right? So what's in it for me? What's in it for me? I suck, and the systems that I've been building suck miserably. Like, that's not a good place to start from. And what happened, Patty, is that we started trying to reverse engineer a what's in it for me. Why would I want to get on board with a transformation that was premised by and reiterated that you are at fault and you are the reason that transformation is necessary? Do you want to jump in on what's in it for me?
Right. I was thinking about adult learners and how when you do adult learning, you have to connect it to something they already know, and they have to be able to relate it. My field is healthcare. And if anybody's experiencing change right now and trying to get people to do things differently, it's healthcare. But you're right, the default is extremely important with protocols and procedures because they have to work quickly and their brain has to do these same things over and over and over. The compassion book is talking about changing people's relationships and how they connect, because what we're seeing, especially now, is that the human to human connection is extremely important, but some people do not know. They know leaders, 92% of leaders know that compassion and connection are important, but 80% of those 92% don't have the foggiest idea specifically how to start. What actions do I take? And it's a major pulling people up from their roots, and knowing too that when this change is over, there's never a point where the change starts and then the change is over. Change is a constant. It is change, capital IS. It is. It's just a matter of where you want it to go. What do you want it to look like? And real quickly, I think about this commercial I saw years ago that I use in some of my training, where these two people are riding down an escalator and the escalator stops. If you Google man on escalator, the escalator stops. And these two people are about 3 steps apart and they stand there for a minute. And then the woman looks back at the man and he looks at her. And it gets to where they stand on this escalator for a long length of time. And basically they start screaming, somebody do something, because they don't have the foggiest clue what to do. And then the end of it is you see them sitting on the stairs waiting for somebody to do something. So now's the time to do something.
If that's not an analogy for life, I have no earthly clue what it is.
Just Google man on escalator and it'll pop up.
Cool. I think that all of these discussions around how these things work and what's in it for me and how do the leaders see things, that's why I started thinking about change management in the first place, because I realized that change management was a great part of how IT got things done, or should have been, and that part was missing. And so I looked at some of the models that were out there: 8 steps, 10 steps, 14 steps, 56 steps, escalators, whatever. And one of the things I saw, I've modified slightly, and I call it the VIRSA model, VIRSA. And this is really basic, simple, but it tells you the fundamental, I think, things that you have to have in place in order to accomplish a change or a transformation. One of them is a vision. Where are you going? That's the V. The I is incentives. You have to have a reason, the what's in it for me, but it's a little deeper than that. It's not the selfish mode. It's you want to offer people something, and the primary incentive is it's not money, it's not power, it's not any of the normal things that you think of when you think of incentives. It's how is this going to make my job better on the other side? That's what gets people to change at work. How is my job going to be better? I have to unlearn and I have to relearn what's in it for me, right? And then the R is if you're asking people to do this stuff and you don't give them the resources to change, then you're tying their hands. They're not going to accomplish it, and you're not going to get the change done. The S is for skills. you have to train people to do things the new way. And then the A is the action plan. How is this going to happen? When is it going to happen? Who's going to be involved? All of those things. If you make all of those things part of the overall plan, you have a much better chance of getting organizational change or transformation accomplished if those are included,
So,
in my opinion.
so I love that model. So let me ask you this. Where do you think that most leaders and organizations underinvest in the Versa model?
I think they underinvest in resources, they underinvest in skills, they underinvest in incentives, and a lot of times they don't have an action plan. They might have a vision, oh, we're going to do that, but they really don't have any idea of the steps it's going to take to get there.
And now that's telling, because it's not, it's more of a systemic lack of understanding the entirety of what's required. Like we have a vision. What I see frequently, Roy, is that I have a dream, I have a vision, I know where I want this to go. So go do it. And folks might actually buy into the vision. They might actually say, that's a really good thing, but here's the deal. We're going to have to change some things. We're going to need to invest in this. I hear organizations saying, we want to develop, we want to adopt DevOps. We want a DevOps, right? And invariably, the first thing they want to do is buy a tool, right? It's like, let's buy a tool. And I'm like, no. Tool is probably the last thing that you do, right? And I'm looking at do we have a strategy? Is there a need for a DevOps strategy? Do we have the skills and the resources to execute a DevOps strategy? Or do we just want to associate ourselves with some new buzz phrase in the industry and be able to say, hey, we're doing, whatever the new cool thing is. And I don't dislike DevOps at all. Everybody that knows me knows that. But there is a whole lot of hype around it as the golden solution, or even it requires you purchase my tool for $19.95 a month, and then all of a sudden you'll be DevOps. And it's like that underestimates the enormity of what a transformation is. So I'm looking
Actually,
at
Greg, there's something that came up in Roy's Versa model for me that I've discussed a few times with clients now, and I really like this. There was guys that I work with over in Sweden, and something that he said that I thought was just brilliant when it comes in terms of skills, that it isn't just about skills. Right now, there needs to be a really big competency transformation. There has to be a competency transformation. And if there's a recent Gartner report out, so if people haven't seen it, look for the Future of Work Trends post-COVID-19 report from Gartner. And it covers, a whole wide range across HR and whole other parts of the business. But one of the things that struck me was what they term as critical skills, how the criticality, how they're redefining what critical skills are now. So do have a look at that, because they're looking at what's critical for strategic, what for employees, but what are also critical workflow roles now. So as we're looking at how we flow through what we do, I think that's a really important thing as well. So I encourage people to have a look at that and just
Simone, can you put that on the KTLO website?
Yeah, for sure.
So that'd be great.
Yeah, people will have to register for it. It doesn't cost you anything, but but it's definitely worth reading.
Not on our site, on the Gartner site. We don't.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Register. Everybody's free access to all of the information that we say.
I'll stick it on a LinkedIn post.
There you go. Kathy, you've been quiet. You don't show up here not being expected to be called on by me. You know this, right? So I want to talk to you. You weighed in a little bit on the what's in it for me. And I like what Roy differentiated is, in some cases, I think managers oversimplify. It's like that our staff are just so basic. It's like, well, you're going to get a few more points of profit sharing, or, we're going to give you a shiny new tool. And I really don't believe that people are that shallow. I think that people have higher order aspirations and they want to be part of something. So when you talk about what's in it for me, what does that trigger in your mind?
Well, what's in it for me, I agree that it's not the shiny whatever. It goes much deeper into their personal things that are important to them, whether it be values or you name it. People need to resonate with the change. They need to believe in the change and truly believe that it is going to make your job better at the other end. How specifically is it going to make my job better at the other end? How is it going to make my life better at the other end? Especially right now, I think we need to go way beyond how is it going to make my job better. It's how is it going to make my life better?
Yeah, I thank you. I think that there are a lot of workers, people, even people who are self-employed, every one of you look like you're in your own home, right? Myself included, right? So we are all working in a location that isn't a traditional work location. And some of the things that have come out of the extended pandemic are people are learning new ways to work. We got kids going to school. We got, we have a little more flexibility just because it's right there. I mean, life is happening just right outside that door, right? And I think there's a sense that people have this optimism that what if we didn't fall back into our default behavior? What if we fell forward into a new relationship with our work and with our employers and what that looks like? Go ahead.
And that's where one thing that I didn't bring up that was really resonating with me is the need to belong. That is a basic human need for all of us, is the sense of community. And I think as leaders, that's something that we really need to work on. When people believe that they're in it together and they have the same common vision, as we talked about from leadership, they get on board pretty quick.
Yeah, I think you nailed on another topic that we need to do an entire session is what does community mean when we're now virtual? I mean, I'm a big management by wander around fan. I was raised in an environment where that was a high value. And so a frequent amount of the meetings that I had with people were at coffee shops. Why? Because it's neutral territory. Why? Because it encourages more organic kind of conversation that isn't necessarily, here's the 6 points that I want to talk to you about. But that's been, I don't want to say it's been taken away. It's been changed involuntarily. It's been changed. And I find that really, really interesting. And I said to Dee, I've never met Dee before, but I said, I'm going to get you on a phone call. And that's the modern equivalent, I think, of saying, hey, would you like to meet for coffee? Which, all things being equal, most people would. But we have a reach that goes beyond that. Simone, you are our resident expert on how humans interact with each other.
Actually, I liked what Dee was saying before, the human to human. I call it the H2H component. So instead of H2O, we actually need to have H2O plus the H2H. There's your science formula right there. But one of the things that resonated with me as Kathy was talking is, having that sense of community. There's a great article from Forbes, and again, we can make sure we put the link in the YouTube comments for this, but it's called Lighthouse Leadership. And when you think about it, your people are looking to you for light, for hope, for safety. And that means you need to be, like a lighthouse. You have to be the standing rock, solid and really tall during the worst of whatever storms are around you. There's, and another lady I follow, Libby Girl, and her work on hope leadership. And it's really about inspiring you to take action despite the setbacks. So the setbacks are going to be there, but it's about taking action anyway. But a leader still has to have that. And in this article, you'll actually find some really cool questions on each of those areas. So just as an example, are you helping people embrace the change so that they see the light rather than just feeling the heat of what's going on? Or are you owning up to your own mistakes and correcting them, because there's constant challenges now and we don't have all the answers. So we need to have that vulnerability, transparency, but also to see that, we are human along with them. Are you postponing your judgment on things until you understand exactly what the context is for that, for the team or for the individual that you're working with in regards to what's going on? And I think some of the other thing that most people don't like this conversation, but are you identifying the important, what in this article calls the undiscussables. So the elephants in the room. Are you making it safe, the psychological safety needed for people to feel that they can talk about this stuff openly and work through and become more innovative and become creative just because they have the emotional and mental space to allow that?
Patty, you and I have talked about community back when I was being a CIO, and that came up. I'd like to get your kind of perspective on people need to be part of a community, or people want to feel part of a community.
You know, humans are all pretty much the same in a couple of respects. One, we want to know that the hours of commitment we're giving someplace adds value. We want to feel relevant and heard, and we want to be a part of something. I love this quote by Will Durant. He wrote a book called The Story of Philosophy. Men ought to know that in the theater of human life, it is only for gods and angels to be spectators. So my point being is a transformation, there are no spectators. It's a whole org activity, right? And that includes the leadership. And you're looking at changing, but you're not transforming a business. You're transforming people and systems, and that is your community. And if you have an intentional community, you're transforming them toward that value, the kind of relevance that they seek for the reason they're giving you their time. We have to commit to upskilling, reskilling, taking a look at, like, post-COVID, your whole benefit structure should be changing. What you offer people who work from home, what you do, everything needs to be reviewed, assessed, changed. We need to look at the compassion of us as a community, as a system. And then really think about how community works. What does community mean for the organization as it moves to the purpose? I mean, Greg, you and I have talked a lot about how you're not in business to make people feel good, but at the same token, you have a purpose and you need to be in business to get revenue. That's why businesses exist. The gap between the person that comes in and their ability to help you meet that purpose is driven by the system, how they commit and are intentional within that system, and the culture you create to get there. So there is a direct link. Dee, you said something earlier that soft skills are the hard skills, which they are. It's the complex adaptive system. It's hard, it's difficult, and it's messy, and it's confusing sometimes. But I think it's really easy to measure a couple of things. One, who's the jerk on your team? And everyone on the team will tell you. Number two, who's the guy who really has it going on? And everyone will tell you. That's measurable, that's real, that's people's experience. And I think we have to simplify things to what's really working toward purpose.
Wow, that was a Power Pack session, and I saw at least 3 other future topics put out here, or some of us are just going to hop on a Zoom call and we're going to do this. Roy, at a minute to the hour, can you believe it? It's been a whole hour. I'm turning it back to you to put a wrap on this thing, and I will join all of y'all next time around.
It did go quickly, didn't it? You know, when we get involved in a topic that really has some meat on the bones, we just don't look at the clock and the time just whizzes by. So thank you, Dee, for joining us today. Glad to have you aboard on the call. Kathy, thanks for coming back. You're growing in number of visits now. Unbelievable. Getting to be a regular contributor, and that's great. Thank you.
We'll have to stamp your coffee card so you get a freebie at the end of
That's
your term.
it. So we should have the KTLO coffee clutch card and get a little stamp every time you come in. That's awesome. So we'll be back next week. We'll be back next week for episode 28. 28. We're pushing 30, and I dimly remember when never mind. I was pushing. That was last week. I was pushing 30. So
oh, you youngster, you.
yeah, great to be here as always on a Friday, and thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Until then, what is it? We'll leave the light on for you. No, it's KTLO, keeping the learning on.
learning
Learning on.
Yes. Okay. Once again, we have failed to say it at the same time. We don't care.
No, so I didn't even try.
Okay.